Good afternoon. Thank you again for joining us for the Tulane Future of Energy Forum. It is my pleasure to introduce our next and final session of the day, Harnessing the Breeze, Offshore Wind and Clean Energy. Please do silence your cell phones, but keep them handy to scan the QR code on the screen, and if there's time at the end of the session, the panel will address some of your questions. And now at this time, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our moderator, Cameron Poole, the Energy and Innovation Manager for Greater New Orleans, Inc.
Thank you. Really excited to share the stage with some members of our GNO Wind Alliance at GNO Inc., some really key leaders in a lot of the work that's been happening here in Louisiana around this emerging sector. And we're going to start with just going down the line, introducing yourselves to the audience, and then we'll dive in.
Hello, my name is Reggie Poché. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor of Education, Training, and Student Success at Nunez Community College. A long job title that means one thing. I help manage our career and technical education programs and our academic programs.
Hi, I'm Jana Grauberger. I'm a shareholder at Liskow and Lewis, which is a law firm with offices in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Louisiana, and also Houston, Texas, which is where I practice.
Hey everyone, my name is Shafin Khan. I'm the VP of External Affairs and Innovation at the Beach at UNO. We also serve as a research and technology foundation supporting the University of New Orleans and have a variety of wind initiatives. I'm a Tulane alum of the Biomedical Engineering Department, and if you're wondering why a biomedical engineer is on a Future of Energy panel, I am as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Netherton. I'm a Senior Program Manager at the Southeastern Wind Coalition. We are a 501c3 dedicated to economic development through both land-based and offshore wind in the southeastern United States, and I run our Louisiana program. I am also a Tulane alum, but in the law school.
Something I share with Shafin, ironically, is also meeting him first in the bio work here in New Orleans, but we're not going to talk about that. I'm actually going to start with Jenny. I know I can trust you to sort of set a wider context before we get into more individual items on the state of the industry, starting nationally, but of course, with a more Louisiana and Gulf of Mexico lens as well.
Sure. So to start off with, I think it's important to remember that offshore wind is still a very young industry. So the first offshore wind turbines were installed in 1991, which is not all that long ago. I was 1 when they were installed. So I think it's important to keep in mind that this industry, especially in the US, is very much in its infancy. Offshore wind has really come to fruition in Europe, and we're seeing a lot of development now in China and in the Pacific region as well. So until last summer, there were only 7 turbines in US waters, and now we are rapidly increasing that number I won't say every day, but frequently now. So for some context in the Gulf of Mexico itself, so the federal leasing process applies to leases that are granted by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And if I slip into too many acronyms, please just let me know. I know there are so many in this world. So this really all kicked off when Governor John Bell Edwards, who was on the stage earlier today, asked BOEM to create an intergovernmental task force to explore offshore wind energy in the Gulf of Mexico. So this kicked off a process that resulted in the first Gulf of Mexico auction occurring last summer. Summer of 2023. So in that auction, RWE became the first federal leaseholder in the Gulf of Mexico with a lease that's about 42 miles south of Lake Charles. This July, BOEM made a double announcement. So first of all, they canceled a second Gulf of Mexico auction because of lack of interest. However, they also released a request for competitive interest on 2 areas in the Gulf of Mexico that Hecate Energy was interested in using for green hydrogen. So outside of the open lease process, you can also put in unsolicited requests, which is what Hecate did. So when BOEM put out the request for competitive interest, they actually did receive competitive interest from Invenergy. So BOEM has not announced official next steps yet, but the assumption is that that will go to an auction because of the competitive interest. So the current state in the Gulf of Mexico is we have one project in federal waters, two projects or two areas that are currently being pursued by developers, and then additional leasing in the future. So Louisiana is also doing something that almost no other state is doing, which is leasing its state waters for offshore wind development. So the state of Louisiana controls the first 3 nautical miles offshore. And so the state has for many years leased that land for oil and gas, and they are now also doing that for wind energy. So back in December of last year, the Department of Energy and Natural Resources granted 2 operating agreements in state waters. One of those projects is Diamond Offshore Wind that is a little bit to the west of Port Fourchon. And then the other project is by Cajun Wind, and that is a little bit south of Lake Charles. So those projects are still very much in their initial stages of development. However, they are moving forward, and they also provide a path to development outside of the federal process. So as far as permitting for those projects go, that will be under the authority of the Coastal Zone Management Act as well as the Army Corps of Engineers. Additionally, the first land-based turbine in Louisiana will actually be erected at Port Fourchon either later this year or early next year. And that is a project in collaboration with Gulf Wind Technology, which is a phenomenal local company. Some of you may have met James Martin, who is also a Tulane alum. But that will really give us an opportunity to start seeing what the impacts of the Gulf of Mexico will be on turbines. That is an area that still has a great deal of uncertainty as far as how hurricanes will impact turbines and what that looks like. And so this test turbine will be a really good entry point to starting to determine some of those issues and the solutions to them. So lastly, I would be remiss if I did not mention that we are soon to be under a new political regime. In the first Trump administration, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management slowed down permitting for federal wind energy projects, and we have no reason to believe that that won't be the case for this administration as well. So although we are not expecting project cancellations or anything along those lines, the timelines for some of these projects could be extended. However, the Gulf of Mexico projects, with how recent they are unlikely to be affected by those timeline changes. So hopefully that 10,000-foot view helps, and I'm happy to clarify anything if you think I missed it, Cam.
You nailed it. So now that we have the scene set here, we're going to get into some of the individual work of our fellow panelists here, and I'm going to start with Shafin. Shafin, the beach at UNO and the R&T Foundation does a lot, but objectively, y'all were early leaders in laying out a set of really exciting programs that are steering towards UNO students and opportunities in this emerging sector. I think it has a name like the LA Wind Energy Hub. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. So the Louisiana Wind Energy Hub is a collaboration between the Research and Technology Foundation at UNO and the university. And our goal really is, it was kind of born from talking to some of our alumni, many of whom graduated from UNO's engineering school that has traditional engineering programs like mechanical, electrical, civil, but we also have one of the top naval architecture and marine engineering programs in the country. And so a lot of those alumni were actually already involved and leaders in the offshore wind energy industry, and they told us about how they gathered these skills while they were at the university, particularly by working in some oil and gas related projects. A lot of those skill sets translate. And so we realized that we had an opportunity there to kind of capitalize on the work that some of our faculty research-wise were doing, but also some of the curricular things that were happening. So the Louisiana Wind Energy Hub essentially is a place for various programming, seminars, workshops, various roundtable discussions. We do various research, innovation projects. Jenny mentioned Gulf Wind Technology. We have a faculty member that's working very closely with them on looking at new materials to actually address some of the hurricane-related issues that are going on. We also have other projects looking at floating wind, as well as transmission issues, and we're actually got a couple of others in the pipeline. And then we're doing various projects around workforce. First is getting our students at UNO thinking about offshore wind as a career path. So we've created a program called the Wind Scholars, where basically we started with engineering, but we've actually now moved into the business school with a supply chain and logistics management program. The idea there being the students basically take a mini concentration in offshore wind in the various engineering disciplines or the supply chain discipline. And in addition to that, we actually pair them with a company in the community that is working in the industry. So the students are getting the curricular expertise, but they're also getting a foot in the door in the industry and getting that experiential opportunity. We've had 11 students so far who've been selected as scholars for that. But what's been really exciting is that announcing these scholarships has created kind of this culture amongst the students of realizing, okay, I don't have to go into oil and gas. There are these other renewable energy opportunities that are available. And so we've had a lot of other students, several of which have actually been hired by Gulf Wind Technology, many of whom are participating in a Department of Energy competition called the Collegiate Wind Competition, which many of the people on this panel are actually mentors for. And so that's been a really exciting piece for our specific UNO students. We're also doing work to actually build a pipeline of students to UNO and into this industry. We do various career days, but most recently we've actually announced a partnership with Kid Wind to actually do a Teach the Teacher model in New Orleans high schools, so that actually the teachers are being armed with information about renewable energy, how to build wind turbines, and can actually pass that knowledge on to their students. So we're really excited about that as well.
I've had the pleasure of interacting with the Wind Scholars and the Collegiate Wind participants from UNO, and it is just so amazing to see the excitement and conviction they have in getting involved in this industry. So kudos to Shafin on the early rollout of those programs. Of course, higher education isn't the only space that we can address building out workforce pathways for local students and existing professionals seeking to reskill towards offshore wind. Our community and technical college systems are crucial to that for a number of sectors. At GNO Inc., we've had the pleasure of working with Nunez on a number of those, as recently as advanced manufacturing, but now with offshore wind too. So Reggie, tell us what's been happening on campus with your programming.
Oh, happy to. So for those of you who don't know, Nunez Community College is in St. Bernard Parish, the parish as locals call it. We have about 3,000 students at Nunez. Our chancellor, Dr. Tina Tinney, says that we are a small college that does big things, and with respect to this program that we've just developed, she's right. We recently started our inaugural cohort of students in our wind turbine technician program. So what that program does is it's an associate's degree program that will train students to serve as wind turbine technicians in both commissioning, maintaining wind turbines, servicing wind turbines. Community colleges are in a unique position to stand up these trainings because a lot of the faculty we already have some of the expertise that's needed. Now, there are more specialized expertise that we also need to bring in as a college, but we were able to immediately stand up the safety aspect and the sea survival aspect of our program because we have an emergency medical services program at Nunez. So our faculty already are skilled and trained as offshore rescuers. They are EMTs, they're paramedics. They have the sea survival skills. So that aspect of the program allows us to sort of hit the ground running in that regard. And then, of course, a lot of community colleges have instrumentation programs, of which Nunez has one. They have mechatronics programs, which Nunez has, which gives us some baseline to start training on all the electronics, mechanics, pneumatics, hydraulics of a wind turbine. So we already have faculty in place for the most part to help. And now it's about securing the material resources we need to offer the kind of training that we know we need to do to train well-educated wind turbine technicians who are work ready. So one thing that we're currently in the process of doing while our current cohort's undergoing their safety and first aid and rescue training is building out the mechanical and electrical training. And we are in constant conversations with industry partners, with ourselves, doing research to make sure that our program is meeting all the standards. And the standards that we chose to follow in developing this program are the Global Wind Organization standards, the GWO standards. So they said, or the GWO says the international standards for codes of practice in the profession, both safety and also operational practice. And we've used that as our guide to help us develop the curriculum. And what's tricky and which we're finding in that there are not many community colleges in the country that have wind tech programs. You know, there are a few, and very good ones, by the way, that offer associate degrees. But one thing that they don't all do is offer the comprehensive menu of GWO certifications, which our program aspires to. And we wanted to have a comprehensive program, or maybe we were just too ambitious, I don't know. But nevertheless, here we are, the curriculum is written, now we have to build it out. We've been, we're on weekly meetings with folks who know more than we do about these things. You know, I'm a former English professor. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a wind tech. I had a lot to learn. I think I know more about being a wind tech than I ever wanted to know. I'm happy that I do. And I'm confident we will finish building out this program, and I hope we will, be the ones to graduate and then put into work Louisiana's first generation of Louisiana-grown wind techs. So that's sort of where we stand as a college, and it's a very big project for us, but we're happy to do it because it's our mission to serve the public, and this is our way of serving.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see a number of programs really targeting building out these new opportunities in new sectors like off and onshore wind for our students and families here. Now, relevant to the existing generation, it's often lost on people that Louisiana is powering that East Coast development that's a bit ahead of us that Jenny was talking about. When you think about our specialized engineering vessels, construction skills and infrastructure here that's been used to deploy offshore oil and gas, the transferability of those skills and assets is immense, 80+%. So it's no surprise that Louisiana has been leading the charge. 9 companies were involved in building those first 7 turbines we started with that Jenny said. About nearly a quarter of all domestic contracts in the offshore wind supply chain are with Gulf Coast-based companies. And so just because we're further out in our developments here doesn't mean there's an imminent opportunity for our workforce and our companies to benefit from engaging this industry. Now, supply chain is not the only shared trait between oil and gas and offshore wind, and so I'm gonna steer towards Jana here to talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in the policy and regulatory landscape with these types of offshore projects and what's been exciting you the most, maybe the most headaches, and also what's similar to oil and gas in that regard.
Sure. What's interesting and is that there are plenty of differences between oil and gas and renewable energy, including offshore wind. But in the offshore space, because we've had offshore oil and gas for so long, because it's been regulated by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, by the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, who are also, now in charge on the federal side of things for a lot of the permitting and operations and safety and the leasing for offshore wind. That all the same things that apply to energy to oil and gas, a lot of those transfer over. And so that's kind of how the space within which I and others in my firm got involved in offshore wind. So in terms of what we've been doing in terms of helping people get qualified, you have to be qualified with the federal government and meet some pretty specific requirements in order to even go out and bid on an offshore wind lease. We've been helping people through the lease auction process, and for different auctions, it's a little bit different. It all gets published in the Federal Register, and you have to kind of go through that and understand what's going to happen. what are the terms of the lease that you might be bidding on, or once you've obtained a lease, what rules do you have to follow? And then beyond that, the underlying regulations, of which there are a lot, that you're going to have to comply with. And then all the way through that construction process, coming online, and then being regulated as you would operate an offshore wind project. So we've kind of done some work along the whole span of that, and I think what I'm seeing is that a few years ago, there was, not only in Louisiana, but everywhere, there was a lot of excitement, right? It was just pure excitement and a lot of investment, and we had lease auctions along the East Coast where there were, I think, there was a, $1.1 billion bonus bid, right? That's a ton of money, right? Just not even to be able to operate an offshore wind farm, but just to have the right to take a lease, which only gives you the right to go out and do some site assessment activities, and gives you the right to then apply later based on that site assessment for construction and operations plan. So we saw all of that with leasing, and I think what I've seen more recently is that leasing is still happening. The federal government had 2 offshore wind leases this year, one in Central Virginia, and where was the other one? The other
Gulf
one
of Maine.
in the Gulf of Maine, right, was this year. But we also saw 2 lease sales canceled. We saw Oregon canceled, and we saw the Gulf of Mexico a lease sale canceled as well. So we're still seeing leasing, but we're seeing, maybe that some of that interest was kind of topped off on the front end, and now you have all these projects that are getting underway, and that's kind of balanced things out in that regard. And then in terms of the projects that have, you have all these leases. I think there are 37 active offshore wind leases that are commercial leases off the coast of the United States in federal waters, and you have about 10 of those projects that have gone all the way through the permitting process, and so are in a position or already are, have their construction and operations plan approved, and can go ahead and construct their project. And what's happened is, as inevitably would happen, there have been bumps in that road, all the sorts of things that happen when you start actually doing something versus planning it, contemplating it, as was mentioned, this is a new industry really in the United States to a large extent. So we've seen a lot of, there have been delays and just, I don't even really want to say hiccups, but learnings that have had to happen. The regulations have been improved around kind of facilitating these projects going forward. Some of those new regulations went into effect, just this summer. So we've seen that as well. And then what comes next, or what comes along with that? There are currently at least a dozen, really substantive legal challenges to offshore wind, most of these on the East Coast. And so we've seen a lot of litigation around offshore wind, and I think we can expect that to continue. And so, as people have raised a variety of challenges, some people who just object to offshore wind, some people who don't want to look at wind turbines from their property, or experience other impacts that they may have, commercial fishing interests who worry about the impact of offshore wind on their livelihood, frankly. We've seen a lot of challenges, and those challenges are ongoing. So with all of that, the knockoff effect of that, along with some supply chain disruptions, with inflation, with interest rates getting higher, has been delays in these projects that makes the financing in, the investment end of it difficult, because there's such large sums of money that need to be invested, and it's going to take such a long time to get through the permitting process, to get through the construction process, and to bring, to connect that power to the grid ultimately. So I really think that we're just kind of at that settled in spot, so to speak, where the excitement has turned into practical reality of doing, and there have been bumps and challenges that people are working through, and that's, kind of just where we are. And we can talk a little bit later about what's to come next, or what we would predict to come next, because we are moving from an administration that has been very supportive of offshore wind, that has really staffed up the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, and put a real spotlight and focus within those agencies on doing everything they possibly can to help out these wind projects and push them along. And so we know that in January there'll be a change in that in terms of what this new administration, how they feel about offshore wind, and so we can talk a little bit more about what kind of impacts that might bring.
Yeah, let's talk about it. We've seen 30 gigawatt by 2030 be the federal target as a standard over the last couple years. Of course, that's also added by state-level targets, which have been essential in East Coast procurement schemes, and just generally the role states play in driving the purchase of wind power to support state-level decarbonization targets. Louisiana established a 5 gigawatt by 2035 one in its climate action plan of 2020. And goals and targets have changed, but they all speak to the accelerated pace we're trying to get to certain scales of decarbonization by leveraging renewable resources like offshore wind. And of course, with change in targets, administration or otherwise, there's always a question of, are we going to get there? And so that sort of, again, relates to what you do and what you touched upon with permitting challenges and these bumps in the road. So in the lens of what's to come, maybe, dive in that a little bit further.
Sure. I guess I'll start off with, again, mentioning, thinking of this through the oil and gas context, right? So we've been in an administration that on day one put a pause on offshore federal oil and gas leasing, right? Said, and had, a campaign pledge of no more drilling. So we've seen that, and not that there haven't been a bunch of initiatives, not that there wasn't a pause, but it didn't end oil and gas production. We know that there's more oil and gas being produced in the United States than there was before. So regardless of how you feel about that, looking through that lens, I think shows that for offshore wind, we can expect to some extent something similar, in that even if the new administration says or has campaigns saying, I'll shut this down, I want to see an end to this, that's unlikely, right? We have these 10 projects that have gone all the way through the permitting process and are in the construction phases or have the right to start construction. And, it would be, in my opinion, difficult, if not impossible, through something like an executive order to just stop that. So those projects, will go on, and I think that will, kind of continue to develop that foothold of offshore wind, in the U.S. What can happen, I think, is that you could have changes in lease sales. So, and we've seen that in the oil and gas context. The current 5-year plan that we're under, there are to be 3 federal offshore oil and gas sales over the next 5 years. And there's usually around 10 in a 5-year plan. So the current 5-year plan for offshore wind lease auctions is to have, I think it's a dozen between 2024 and 2029. And what you could very easily see is a change in that. You could see that scaled back, and even if you have a plan to have a dozen wind lease auctions, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have that many anyway, even if in a fully supportive administration. So I think it's likely that there would be less than 12, but maybe that's and you have to think about your goals, but maybe that's not terrible in the sense that you have 10 that are coming on to fruition. And so, you can definitely see impacts. You could definitely see, as was mentioned, slowdown in the permitting process, just through, if nothing else, putting less resources on it, right? There's just been a ton of resources towards these wind projects. And of the ones that are all the way through the permitting process, they've been getting through that process in an average of 3 years and 8 months. So if we were going on full steam and really pressing to get projects through, and with the improved regulations, that could be condensed even more, right? You could get to a shorter permitting process, but instead we may see that length of time continue, or even that slip, and there be some longer permitting processes, as we go down. So I don't think that we're at a, I've read some articles that have said this is the end. I don't myself personally believe that, or really believe that's possible. I think we would have to, have some bigger changes than that take more time, and would have to get through Congress. And someone mentioned on a panel earlier, they weren't talking about offshore wind, they were talking about something else. But even with a Republican Senate, a Republican Congress, and a Republican president, you still have people in those states. You have actual legislators who have interest in projects continuing, because they have jobs at stake. They have the economies of their state at stake. And so I think that will factor in in a positive way to keep offshore wind going.
And to add just a little bit of a finer point to what you just said about states in the Northeast, just because I think this bears mentioning when we're thinking about development in the Gulf of Mexico. One of the reasons that development in the Northeast has been so rapid is not only that they've had lease sales, but that they have had states incentivize offshore wind projects. So New York, New Jersey, many Northeast states have decided that they want to be 100% renewable eventually, and they are willing to pay a premium for that power in order to get there. So there are also some other market forces that are working as well that will be, like you said, harder to undo or slow down. So.
Yeah, if I could add to that. So I think the other piece is, from talking to some of our partners that are on the ground here that we've connected through Cam's wonderful GNO Wind Alliance. There, as Cam also mentioned, there's 26% of contracts in offshore wind that's happening in Louisiana. And in fact, down in Houma, they built the first service vessel for offshore wind. Houma is not exactly the blue dot in the state, right? So, there is this opportunity to have a bipartisan buy-in for this industry. And so, stay tuned, I guess.
Yeah, and Reggie, I'm going to put you on here just to wrap out the sort of theme, let's say, here of challenges and how to address them. You're rolling out a new curriculum, and like you said, not a whole lot of peers in this space. I think that's validating the vision of Nunez, right, and being a leader here, but I'm sure that brings some challenges on how you go about this. What are you working on right now in that regard?
Well, the challenges are many, but I don't think, they're not insurmountable, for us. And what's the recipe to start a program like this? I don't know. All I know is that the ingredients are really expensive, and that's been the first challenge that we've encountered. For example, 2 days ago, we received a huge shipment of our mechanical and technical training equipment. The trainers that the students would be using in our labs to learn how to operate turbines, how to service them, et cetera. And that was a huge investment on the college's part. And that's only 1/3 of our program in terms of the material investment that we need. I'm currently putting together a proposal for, it's called an advanced rescue trainer that is required per Global Wind Organization guidelines, which is basically a mock nacelle that students need to train in order to practice getting in and out of a nacelle. This one's a little bit lower to the ground, but nevertheless, we need to invest in that. And that's sort of the one of the big challenges is finding the material resources. So we have weekly meetings looking at granting opportunities, trying to find those grants that would align with our purpose, and we're chasing after as many as we can and utilizing the ones that we currently do have access to, of course. But besides that, because I know we can find a way to make all of that work, the largest challenge for a program like ours is finding the faculty that we need. They just don't exist locally. There aren't many wind technicians living in Louisiana or in the Southeastern United States for that matter. There are many in Texas, of course, working in onshore forms. So we've had to actually solicit services of headhunting firms to help us find wind techs. But we have also, of course, are a public institution of higher education, which means we pay public salaries. So it's difficult for us to woo any would-be faculty members who currently work as wind technicians because the salaries that they command are significantly higher than what we can pay. Typically in a community college, a lot of our faculty, especially in the skilled trades, are retirees. They've worked in the field for 25, 30 years. They've learned a lot. They're experts at their craft, and they want to give that back and teach, and they make fantastic teachers. There aren't many 55, 60-year-old wind techs in the country right now. So that's the biggest challenge, is finding the faculty members that we need. As I said earlier, we can cover other aspects of the program like emergency services, first aid, sea survival, but it's finding the wind techs, just one, all I need is one right now, to teach students about what it's like to live that life, what do you do day to day, and how do you do it. So that's the next big step, finding that person, whoever they are.
Are you out there? Thank you for that, Reggie. We have a couple co-producers of an event we actually partner with the Tulane Law School on, and that's Louisiana Wind Energy Week, taking place the week of January 27th this year. And also I'd be remiss to not shout out another co-producer in the audience, Stacy, with the National Wildlife Federation. But before we get into that, I think I've played invisible hand enough in this conversation. Did we have any questions submitted through the Q&A?
We do. We can start with this one. What sort of infrastructure do we need to build to best outfit the Gulf Coast for offshore wind, and about how far away are we from it being feasible?
Well, we benefit from having a whole lot of that already. You see $hundreds of million financing of projects on the East Coast to catch up to what our ports and specialized vessels and engineers have been doing for decades, which is why you're hearing a lot of retooling as a common thread with both legal practices, student curriculum, and the sort. But did I miss anything there? I mean, the point being, we're really built out ahead. It's really building the capacities to support these projects on the state policies.
As far as like where they're trying to catch up in the Northeast, our ports, for instance, have like reinforced staging areas. So if you're storing a bunch of very heavy components, you don't want to do that on ground that hasn't been reinforced. We have deep water capabilities at our ports, so you need vessels to be able to come into a port. We also just have, cranes, infrastructure that other ports that maybe haven't done as much work in the energy sector have not developed yet. So when we talk about what are our advantages, those are the things. One other interesting thing is a lot of engineering knowledge lives here in Louisiana. And so even for projects that have been developed on the East Coast, a lot of that has been done by Gulf Coast companies and Gulf Coast workers. So, Louisiana, I realize this sounds very overly simplistic, but we know how to put stuff on the seafloor and make sure it stays there. So we do have advantages in that realm if you want to get into specifically kind of what we're talking about.
Can I add to it in terms of the existing infrastructure and how it's already set up to help, participate in this change is the workforce that exists here is also part of the infrastructure. One quick anecdote, in our training program, we have a course titled Blade Repair. So we're teaching students, or we will teach students how to repair turbine blades. All that is a course in composite materials, how to take fiberglass and repair a blade. You know who are really good at repairing things with fiberglass? Fishermen in the Gulf of Mexico. And we've had discussions about trying incumbent worker training programs where, in the off season, let's bring in, some fishermen who might want to learn how to, scale a turbine so they can repair the blades because they're really good at fiberglass work. Or I'm even thinking if I can't find someone to teach fiberglass work for us as a wind tech, I'll bring a couple of fishermen and they'll learn what they need to learn. We'll do it that way.
I love that anecdote. I see also Megan from True Transition here who knows a whole lot about the various ways our ships can be put more to work. So I encourage you to network with her too. Do we have another question?
So what Reggie was just talking about actually ties into one of the questions, which is Nunez or any other community college developing bridge programs specifically for existing or displaced offshore oil and gas workers?
I mean, that is what we do as a community college. We offer not just credit-bearing degrees, like a more traditional college degree, but we offer incumbent worker training programs. We offer non-credit workforce programs, as you call them, that are all offered at a relatively low cost, if not free, for the students. And we do, even now, have 2 students in our cohort in the WIN program that I mentioned earlier. 2 of them are from the oil and gas sector. So we're totally prepared to teach those workers who might want to reskill or upskill, shift careers. A lot of them, if they've worked offshore in oil and gas, they already have the skills that they need to get out there into the Gulf and to scale those turbines. The only piece that would be needed for them is to actually take the class in the electronics and the pneumatics and the cell. One other thing, though, with these types of programs is a lot of community colleges offer what's called credit for prior learning. So, for example, if someone who worked on an offshore rig came to us and said, I have 15 years of experience working offshore, I want to become a wind tech, some of those skills, like the safety skills, for example, are very similar. We'll give them what's called credit for prior learning or life experience, where they testify through their experience that they met certain outcomes for the courses. We'll give them course credit for that experience, and it accelerates completion of degree, and they save money at the same time. So it's a win-win for them when they can appeal to their professional experience to get credits that they've earned through life.
I like that idea. So I feel like we have time for one other. Do you?
Yes, we do. Can Louisiana's maritime and shipbuilding industries survive without offshore wind?
I would love to cite that, there's a number of emerging, needs for the revitalization of the U.S. shipbuilding and maritime sector. The same firm that built that first SOV in Homa just received huge icebreaker contracts, which are another very specialized type of vessel. But I think, the general theme is those that we've seen less of our infrastructure and assets in that space be put to use. And offshore wind has been a predominant one, and like we said, has been a big one that's putting our Louisiana shipyards and ship operators to work. It's also been cited that oil and gas production is still ongoing, which is historically what they've been used for. So I think it'd be a little dramatic to say that they would die off without offshore wind, but to also say that it's been a critical emerging business and revenue line for them too would also be true.
And I think, when you get into why this is creating so much business, as has been mentioned several times, this industry really did not come out of the U.S. And the U.S. has a special little thing called the Jones Act that says, got my Jones Act fangirls in here. I don't think there are many of those. But it essentially says that only U.S. flagged vessels can do certain operations, including moving cargo from ports. And so, for instance, for the Coastal Virginia offshore wind project, CVAL, in Virginia, they actually ferried components from Canada in order to make sure they were not violating the Jones Act. So we really do have a need for vessels and large vessels that are U.S. flagged that can do this work. So that's what's really driving that shipbuilding boon.
Yeah, that's true for oil and gas too. I have, I'm not a Jones Act specialist, but I have questions that come up about that frequently. From oil and gas clients as well. So I had a client that was shut in the Gulf of Mexico this summer, and for reasons that had nothing to do with them, it had to do with the downstream pipeline, and they were looking for any way, because it was really impacting their business. They weren't going to meet their projections for the entire year if they couldn't get back online. There was no fast way to get back online. And so they were looking at whether they could get a Jones Act compliant vessel or some way to come and have a tanker bring their oil to shore or something like that. And let's just say that's there aren't the vessels to do that, and there are some pretty big hurdles to either bringing it to shore here, or they considered taking it somewhere else, and there were even larger hurdles to doing that. So I think from a shipping industry, the more Jones Act compliant, so U.S. flagged, U.S. built vessels we can have, that there's probably multiple purposes they could serve.
Well, unfortunately, I see the clock a-ticking, but good news that I have for you is, like I said, we have a whole week dedicated to a lot of these problem-solving and opportunity discussions with Offshore Wind specific to Louisiana, Louisiana Wind Energy Week, co-produced by Geno Inc. and the Geno Wind Alliance, UNO, Southeast Wind Coalition, and NWF, and Tulane University. Week of January 27th, various locations, but predominantly here. LAWindEnergyWeek.com. Check it out, RSVP. With that, just any parting remarks there as that clock ticks away and then we see them in January? Great. Thank you, guys.